Can we know anything with absolute certainty? Can we know anything about the world with absolute certainty? Do our minds have access to objective truth, or are we stuck in our own subjective perceptions of the world? These are central questions in philosophy, and they are foundational questions for everybody's individual worldview. Here's the answers. Yes, our minds can know some things with absolute certainty, and we can know truths about the world. We can have metaphysical truths that are known with perfect certainty. Let me give you an example. Perception is a real phenomenon in the universe. Think about that. Perception is a real phenomenon in the universe. That is a claim that is about the nature of what exists. It's a metaphysical claim. And you can know the answer with absolute certainty. You can know from your own perspective, yes, perception is a real phenomenon in the universe. Now, I'm not claiming that accurate perception is a real phenomenon. I'm not saying that our perceptions of the world are the way the world is. I'm simply saying perception is happening. We may be all hallucinating. We may be all brains in vats. It doesn't matter. The phenomena of perception, that the experience of awareness, the awareness of experience, is something that is happening in the universe. Now, there's a couple of interesting conclusions we can draw from this. Number one, it must be the case then, if it's true that perception is a real phenomenon in the universe, that our minds do have access to perfect, objective metaphysical truth. That must be the case if we can know with certainty that perception is a real phenomenon. And it also means that this perception, this subjective awareness, is not something that can be reasoned away. It's not something that somehow, if you just hear a good enough argument, you can conclude, oh, perception isn't a real phenomenon, right? It doesn't matter what arguments people are making. All you have to do is be aware, and you can be aware that awareness is a real phenomena in the universe. There's another really interesting feature about this proposition. Some people say that certain truths are merely analytical truths. They're merely true by definition. So when we say there is no married bachelor, yes, well, we can know that's certainly true, but it's only a statement about how we define our terms. It's not anything about the world. This is not the case with the sentence, perception is happening. There's nothing about the definition of what we mean by perception which entails that it is happening. It could be otherwise. It couldn't be otherwise that somehow you could have a married bachelor, right, given the concepts and the terms involved. It certainly could be the case that perception is not a real phenomena in the universe. It might just be all robots and there's no actual internal experience taking place. Well, that is not the case. It is not an analytical truth. It is not merely true by definition. It is not something that is irrelevant. It's very important. It's a metaphysical truth, and you can know it with absolute certainty, which also means, given the nature of knowing objective truths with certainty, you can know that anybody who denies this truth is wrong. So not only can you know what is necessarily true, metaphysically speaking, about the universe in this respect, you can also know that people who deny it are objectively wrong. So we have these categories of true and false claims about the nature of metaphysics, about the nature of what exists. All of this simply comes from this simple premise that perception is happening. Now, some sticklers might say, oh, well, what do you mean by perception? What do you mean by is, and what do you mean by happening? This is something that I'll spend a lot more time talking about in the future. This is just a confusion of the nature of language. People say things like, oh, well, if you can't define perception, then perception isn't something that's actually out there. It's just this mushy concept in your head. What I am referencing by perception, my own internal conception of what I'm referencing by the word, not necessarily what is being communicated or what's being understood, but what I am referencing in my own mind by the term perception is certainly happening. Right? There is this awareness, there is this feeling of being aware of something. Not necessarily that what I'm aware of is the way that things are, but simply that things are happening. This is something I'm aware of. And I just label that as perception. You could call it experience, you can call it awareness, you can call it consciousness, you can use whatever term you want in whatever language you want. That thing that the concept is talking about is certainly something which is truly happening in the universe. You might call this proposition an axiom. It is a self-evident proposition. You can take this axiom that perception exists and you can use logical deduction to build a worldview and build conclusions off of that. What follows from the existence of perception? What can we know? Is there any certain truths that follow from the existence of perception? This is the methodology of building a logically coherent and rigorous worldview. You discover axioms, you discover certain truths, and then you deduce from there. It doesn't really matter if people disagree with you or they use different terminology or they're not persuasive, that they think you're silly. It doesn't really matter. You yourself can sit down, even if you're mute, you can't use language, you can still have a certain understanding of some feature of the universe, which is that in the universe, perception is happening. You can be certain of it. If you like these ideas, make sure to subscribe. And if you want to help create a more rational worldview, then please head over to my Patreon page and you can support content like this for $1.